There are many tropes throughout stories, but one of my personal favorites would have to be the inner demon. Now, this sort of thing can be done in many different ways, and I'm going to kind of go over some of my favorite examples throughout this video, but this can also go beyond just evil, if you will. Simply using the power of the antagonistic force for the protagonist is something that I see many times. It's a bit of a no-brainer within a story. You're able to create a sense of conflict within the character that automatically ties them to said antagonistic force, therefore making it feel a bit more natural. That way it adds on top of whatever sort of thing the antagonistic force does to our hero. And with this inner conflict now, they are being pushed and pulled between what's right and what's wrong. When our hero is close to being defeated, he's able to tap into this inner power of sorts that allows him to overcome all the odds. And this can be done again in many different ways. You see this in video games, movies, comic books, but here I'm going to focus primarily on anime and manga. Who would have guessed? One of the earliest examples of this would be the iconic story from the 70s, Devilman. Now, this one's a little different from what we would see later on, especially throughout mainstream shonen titles, as one, Devilman is just incredibly violent, even for today's standards. And he's called Devilman for a reason. This isn't just an extra source of power that he can tap into, as I alluded to a bit earlier. This is his main power. And so therefore, our main character really does ride the line of anti-hero with a lot of the actions that he does commit. Devilman is a manga that I don't think is aged as well in comparison to another series like Ashita no Joe, but it's definitely one worth checking out, as this would serve as a huge inspiration for so many stories that would come after it. Now, if I'm not mistaken, based off of what I've seen of Yu Yu Hakusho, this series also has one with Yusuke, but I haven't seen Yu Yu Hakusho, so I'll leave y'all who have to talk about it in the comment section below. But from what I know, that is an earlier example of a character having that sort of power and tapping into it. Inuyasha is another classic series that I haven't seen, but I'm also well aware does have this sort of demon form with the main character. So this is a trope that has a decent amount of history, and again, once something is done so many times, I think people are willing to look at it at a very surface level and dismiss it for being similar, although a series can take it in a very different direction. There are series that sort of make it a completely separate entity that exists within the character, such as Jujutsu Kaisen and Naruto, but I'll get into those later. But one of my favorites is when it's actually not really a separate entity at all. But if not, it's just a part of the main character. Yeah, this is the mandatory part of the video where I talk about Berserk again. Look, I'm sorry. No, I'm not. The Beast of Darkness made its debut in the Conviction arc of Berserk, and by this point in the story, we, the reader, have been given a demonstration of everything Guts has gone through over the last entirety of his poor, miserable life. And so Guts begins to have this entity that seems to talk to him, that pushes him towards revenge and his evil desires. But yet, what's really interesting is this isn't a separate entity talking to Guts, but if not, it's more so Guts talking to himself. Allow me to explain. While yes, to us, the reader, we have been given a physical form of the Beast of Darkness, therefore, I think leading a lot of people to think that it's this separate entity that exists within Guts, it's actually just personification. It's the embodiment of Guts' dark side of the psyche. Everything that he's gone through and all the traumatic experiences have given birth to this thing that's pretty much just the embodiment of all of his hatred, all of his revenge. It's the dark side of Guts' conscience and mind that is telling him to go forth and do all of the wrong things that are going to lead to his self-destruction. I've talked about this before in a previous video, and that is the character's want versus their need. Their want is the original desire that's presented to us in the story, and with Guts, that's his revenge against Griffith. Their need is what they actually need to pursue in order to grow and to get somewhere. It is what the character realizes that they need that is going to cause a change within them. Guts' his need, once he realizes, is to protect Casca, but yet what the Beast of Darkness does, this dark side of his psyche, is it's pushing him constantly to continue to pursue his want. So no matter how much Guts has grown away from who he once was in the Black Swordsman arc, there is still that part of him that truly desires nothing but bloodthirst and revenge. And I saw a video talking about this, and it really brought up an interesting subject. It was talking about sort of the best fighters we've had. In the UFC would be John Jones, and in boxing you could look towards someone like Mike Tyson. There are a lot of other examples of fighters as well, but essentially the premise of the video was how these fighters tap into a very dark side of the human mind in order to sort of push through and win. And I find it interesting that many times in sports, we can excuse certain players' behavior because of success. It's this sort of pursuit of a darker side of who we are as people that allows some to achieve greater heights than they normally could. Not saying that this is the only right approach when showing a character's inner darkness, but I think Hunter x Hunter also does it very, very well with Gon, showing his side and his capability of evil when he falls into anger through all the different stages of grief he goes through in the Chimera Ant arc. Now, personally, I do believe in things beyond us as people, but yet, when you look through human history, what has been the thing that has caused the most death and destruction throughout the thousands of years of human history? It's been us, people. If you were to take away all of the rules and laws we have to contain us and to keep us at check, and you were to take a person away from society long enough, it's crazy what people are capable of. We then move on to a new era of anime and manga, the one that has been given the most credit for all the tropes that we see today. Makes sense since this was the generation that just came before us, and is what really broke anime and manga into the mainstream over here in the West. And that is the era of the big three. Now, Naruto is usually accredited the most with a lot of the tropes that we see nowadays regarding series like My Hero, Black Clover, Jujutsu Kaisen, etc, etc, etc. Every major shonen that comes out instantly gets compared to Naruto and is immediately discredited by the surface level similarities. I think Black Clover is a huge victim of this. So let me say this to kind of get this out of the way. Every story takes something from something else. Every story. There is nothing new under the sun. So don't be a crayon eater and be disingenuously selective about which story you want to point out regarding taking ideas from other series. Because whether it's in its own medium or in other mediums, every story has taken something from something else. Over time is when we get to see a story really differentiate itself and create its own identity. I'll be talking about that concept a little more when I get into the final series I want to talk in this video, but back to Naruto. At the beginning of the series, it's presented as the thing that attacked the Hidden Leaf Village and was trapped within a baby boy, and for that reason he was outcasted from society. Throughout the series, we get to see Naruto have to deal with all of the hatred that was inflicted upon him and how he's constantly overcome it. I did a video near like a year or two ago talking about I was wrong about Naruto and the main theme of overcoming hatred and how that oftentimes gets brushed under the rug behind this whole underdog narrative. But yet, what's really beautiful about the whole dynamic between Naruto and Kurama is seeing how their relationship grows throughout the story. At first, Kurama hating and disrespecting Naruto often, to eventually the two finding some sort of relationship with each other and kind of becoming friends, if you will, understanding each other's pain and what they've been through, and in the end, Kurama being willing to work for Naruto. I think it was a really well done concept long term, considering the amount of times that Naruto did tap into this power, but yet he wasn't ever really to control it, and in the Pain of Saul arc, we got to truly see what would happen when he lost control completely. It's a similar concept that I had talked about before regarding pushing our protagonist into the darker side of their personality, but yet this time it was a completely separate entity, one that Naruto didn't really just have to learn to control, but to understand, thus creating this mutual relationship between Naruto and Kurama that exists now. Now, I was gonna get into Bleach immediately here, but I just had, I think, the best spicy Popeye's chicken sandwich, and I'll be right back. Give me a sec.
Bankai.
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 Out of the big three, Bleach is the series that I've seen by far get the most disrespect. Not saying the other two haven't, and Naruto has gotten a good amount of disrespect as well, but Bleach specifically gets talked about as if it wasn't amazing with its foreshadowing and what it was able to do with the themes of its characters. I think a really great example of this would be Hollow Ichigo. That part of Ichigo that was honest to him the entire time, and when he said that he was Zangetsu, Ichigo originally didn't believe him. And his personality, although, makes us seem to believe he's this pure evil antagonistic force, I think throughout the story what he was really trying to do was teach Ichigo a lesson. And even though I think Naruto had a bit of a misunderstanding regarding Kurama, and throughout he would learn about him more, I think Ichigo had a massive misunderstanding regarding his hollow self and what it was really there for. Especially when you consider all the times throughout the series where his hollow self came to his aid. And it was Ichigo's acceptance of this form of himself that would allow him to protect those that he cared about. As the chapter is so famously titled, "The Blade is Me." It's a bit of a shame I don't think Kubo gets the respect he truly deserves for how poetic I guess he is with his characters. But time has passed on, and since then a lot of series have been inspired by the big three. But one of the series that was greatly inspired by Bleach is at the forefront of manga sales, and that has been Jujutsu Kaisen. Again, this is an example of a series that early on really got pinned, and I myself really spoke about a lot of the feelings and inspirations that I could see within this series, but that was when it was rather early on. But as the series has gone on and on, it's done nothing but to develop its own identity and separate itself from the very things that inspired it, although the inspirations can still be very felt. In fact, I think that's sort of the whole thing when it comes to newer series, is we still have the inspirations that came before it so vivid in our minds, since those were the ones that we grew up with, that we tend to negate that those very series had their inspirations, and then the cycle continues. Now, if you're not caught up on JJK, some slight spoilers, so feel free to click off. But the way that Jujutsu Kaisen has pretty much set up Sukuna as the long-term antagonist within the story has been nothing short of brilliant. The way that he was established instantly from the first chapter, and how throughout the story we've been getting pieces of his character more and more, be it from word of mouth of other characters, as well as his very own actions. One of the examples early on that I think really started to distinguish JJK from its predecessors was when Itadori needed Sukuna's help, and he completely denied it, and then there's that iconic panel of Sukuna and Mahito just laughing at him. Later on throughout the series, we then get to see once Sukuna is unleashed and Itadori is no longer in control, how Sukuna wreaks havoc and pretty much ruins everything Itadori cares about, thus creating this really interesting conflict where Itadori has to pretty much avoid using that power as much as possible, because in no way, shape, or form is it going to come to his aid. A very different sort of style of the inner demon character in comparison to Bleach and Naruto. And it's really great how JJK has made Sukuna pretty much the center of so much of the narrative, considering that the antagonistic force needs him on their side, therefore to guarantee victory, but Sukuna's not really down for working with anyone else either. I also think when Sukuna's present, he had a really beautiful commentary on the reality of curses and humanity. I think his fight with Jogo was a great example of that. Earlier I talked about instances of Psyche given personification or a physical form and manifestation, but yet I think in terms of a whole separate entity, a separate character residing within our protagonist, creating this conflict, I think when it's all said and done, I think Sukuna will probably be pointed to as the best example of doing so. He's an extremely selfish character who has his own motives completely detached to the protagonist and antagonistic force. He serves himself, and when you consider that he's probably the strongest force in the entire series, well, that creates for a very chaotic turn, really at any point within the narrative. Now, it all comes down to personal preference regarding which one and which style you prefer, but the ultimate goal is to be able to create the sense of conflict within the story, primarily with our protagonist, as conflict is what forces our main character to grow more and more and more. Now, this isn't only just done with main characters, but again, the goal is to create conflict that therefore pushes our character to grow in one direction or another. And regarding how destructive you want to make this inner demon, if you will, is really all up to you. Again, this is a very prevalent trope where characters use sort of the antagonistic force's power for themselves, but I think that there are still so many different ways in which it can be done and be made interesting. Whether or not you want to focus more so on this psychology that exists within the character or this separate entity, and whether or not this entity is misunderstood or just truly evil, again, is really all up to you.
お前はつまらんな。